Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloudbase Mayhem. I have a truly awesome show for you today with Canadian hang gliding and paragliding pilot Martin Henry. He's been flying for almost 50 years, and truly, he just took me out of my seat. I was laughing so hard a few times, so you're going to really enjoy this. Before we get to it, I've got a few little bits of housekeeping. The first is the last show we put out a couple weeks ago with Malin Lobb was a huge hit. Got a ton of thanks and appreciation for that one. It's filled with fantastic information, SIV and risk and wing control, and at whatever level you're at. So please go back and listen to that one. We are going to do a follow-up Ask Me Anything show, a bonus show with him that we'll record and release sometime after the new year. So if you have questions for Malin, please shoot them to me. Prefer it via email. Just go to the website, go to the contact page, shoot me an email. If you don't have my email, I don't track things quite as well in Instagram and Facebook and stuff and social media. It's much easier to get lost there. But send me your questions and we'll line up another show with Malin. And I also mentioned in that one that we put out a survey a few weeks back that is at cloudbasemayhem.com/survey. If you haven't done it yet, it only takes a few minutes, and we've gotten tons of responses to this. I was really surprised, and some fantastic demographics and just a lot of information, a lot of great insight and feedback on how we can improve the show. So for those of you who have done it, thank you very much. I'll be announcing in one of these future shows here who got the swag. We'll do a little drawing here maybe this next week. And for the books, for Bastien's beginner's books on paragliding and some Cloudbase Mayhem swag, just to reward you all for doing that. So thanks so much for providing that feedback. And I thought I'd just, before we get into the show today with Martin, I thought I'd go through some of the stats that came in. A lot of this was really interesting to me. Age was about as expected. Most, 41% were between 35 and 44, 23% between 45 and 54, and almost 20% between 25 and 34. That was kind of surprising. So a little bit younger than I anticipated. Years flown, 25% was the biggest number there, between 1 and 3 years, and 15.2% less than 1 year. And then 19% between 3 and 5 years, and 24% more than 10 years. So a pretty wide spectrum there, but again, more numbers at the beginning end than I anticipated, which is awesome. And it just means that I'll keep interviewing the best pilots in the world, but we'll also tweak a lot of shows more towards the beginner end. I think that'll be a lot of fun, towards the learning end, progression end. 73% are XC pilots. And the big one here that really threw me, in a sense, was the hours per year. Almost 80% less than 100 hours. That tells us a lot about currency, and that, obviously it's pretty hard for most to chase it, I'm sure, as hard as they would like to. So that was very telling, and again, will help me orient more towards our listener base. Type of hours, 56% thermal, 27% ridge soaring. An astonishing 85% of you have not had an accident. That's great. I hope the show helped a little bit with that. And only 11.4% have had one accident, so that's great. Type aircraft, 91% paraglider, so I definitely need to put out some more hang gliding shows, but maybe that's representative of the population these days in free flight. I'm not too sure, actually. Most 43%, all about the same, actually found out about the show via social media, just slightly less than that through a friend or an acquaintance. Maybe this isn't representative again of the responses we got in the sample, but very few found out about it from their instructors, which I was surprised about. Instructors, get on it. Tell your students about the show. And yeah, a bunch of other stuff that was pretty interesting. Almost all of you agree with our support model. Very few of you had no opinion, but nobody didn't agree with it, so that was great. So some people thought it'd be okay if we went down the sponsorship route, but I'll definitely stick with this model. It seems to be working, and a whopping 60% of you that responded to the survey also support the show, which is fantastic. So again, I don't think that's representative of our listener audience. If it was the case, I'd be a very wealthy man, and that's not going to happen. But it's fantastic, and it's I just thank you again, as I do all the time, for making this possible and supporting us when you can. A reminder, several people had trouble getting access to the bonus shows. Many of those we have to enter manually. If you come to us and you support the show via a subscription service through the website, you're automatically added. But if you support through Patreon or like a one-time thing through Venmo or PayPal, or you just buy some Cloudbase Mayhem stuff, or you just send me an email, those I all have to enter manually. Again, you do not have to support the show financially to have access. Anybody who listens can have access. Just let me know. If you can't support us financially, I get it. I understand it. It's no problem. I'm not going to ask anything. Hopefully someday you can, but if you can't, no problem. Just let me know. But a lot of those I do have to enter manually, and we just miss some. So I will get you slotted in. It'll be a lifetime subscription. Don't have to worry about it. And also, once you do that, once you have an account on the website, you can subscribe to the bonus shows, and that will just show up in your app, your listening app, like the regular show does. If you have any trouble with that, just reach out. But there's instructions on the website under the subscription tab about how to do that. It's pretty easy on both iPhone or Android. But if you have any trouble, just let us know. How to improve, just real briefly here. We did have a few complaints about sound on my guest side. That's because we've been doing it via Skype, and it's just too complicated, expensive, and time-consuming to send out microphones to all our guests, because I'm interviewing people from all over the world. Although we are looking into doing this in North America and in Europe, so might get that up and going here pretty shortly. Nick Hawks has been really helping me out with that. Most of the time I think it sounds pretty good, but we will keep trying to make it better. And we have not utilized this in the next couple shows that you've heard, but the last few shows that I have recorded, I've been recording a bunch of shows lately. We're using a whole new platform that is way, way better than we've been doing it on Skype. So I think this complaint will shortly go away. More shows on the basics and learning, more interviews on gear, more shows on weather understanding, more oriented towards middle tier and lower end pilots. Some requests for video interviews, so I'm looking into that. And that's about it. There's a bunch of more on design. We've got some design shows actually coming up. And there's a few requests for PPG interviews. We haven't actually done one of those. I'm sorry, but we are tapping back into the sailplane community here shortly. And like I said, another quick reminder, and then we'll get to this show, I promise, is that we have our play. A lot of people ask for a playlist with the music here at the top of the show. That is on Spotify. There's a link to it on the website, and there's also one of our listeners kindly did one for Apple Music, John Bouillard. Thank you very much, sir. And you'll find that on our Facebook page, on the Cloudbase Mayhem Facebook page. So follow us on there, and you can get that if you listen to music via Apple. Let's get into this show. Martin Henry has represented Canada in the world, and so is his wife. They spend their summers out in Mansfield in Washington, which is an awesome place out on the flats. Those of you who have flown Chelan know this spot, but they're up in Canada right now. Of course, they're trapped on that side of the border with the whole COVID thing going on, but they spend their summers chasing it pretty hard in Mansfield, a very special place in the world, and he describes it very well. This one's, like I said, laugh out loud funny. I really enjoyed this. What can I say? He's awesome. So enjoy the show with Martin Henry, and cheers. Martin, this is such a pleasure. I've been super excited to talk to you ever since you sent me an email ages and ages ago. And much has happened in the world since then. But I was just cracking up this morning looking at, the article, the one that everybody talks to, Larry Tudor and all of you legends, the Popular Mechanics, June 1972. And it's it's this awesome hang glider-ish thing on the cover, and it says air surfing, a new sport takes off in kites and gliders. Just before we started talking, you said you've been at this for 50 years?
Well, it's getting pretty close. It's starting to round up to the 50 years pretty soon.
You don't look old enough for that. Did you learn when you were 2?
Just about. I was probably, and like I say, everything's a fog back then, but it was probably somewheres around 12 to 14, somewheres in there.
And were you in Canada then?
Oh yeah, no, I'm Canadian. I live on the West Coast, and that's my home. I know that a lot of people confuse me for someone who actually lives in Mansfield, but that's a latter thing in my flying career, and that came quite a bit later. And no, I live on the West Coast, make my living here, and that's how I end up paying the bills.
And you're in Abbotsford. Is that, am I said that right? Abbotsford.
Yep.
That's like a, is it rude to say that's a suburb of Vancouver?
Yeah, it's all becoming a giant blob that goes from Vancouver out to the Hope area. But yeah, it's just a little bit east of Vancouver.
And you paraglide as well?
Yeah, I also paraglide.
When did that start? When did you, but you mostly hang glide, or what's the percentage?
Well, it's kind of a it's what sport is best suited for what I'm trying to do. Literally for the local flying here now in the spring when it gets really dynamic and there's opportunity, I love flying the rigid wing. I mean, that's the aircraft I love to fly. It's just it's kind of I could fly sailplanes, I could fly regular flex wing hang gliders, but the rigid wing hangs that I fly right now, the Atos and stuff, they're just beautiful looking aircraft. I mean, and they're enjoyable to fly. They have lots of performance, but on the other hand, they're a bit of a pain to pack around and hard to get up a mountain. So quite often, for the local flying, we talked in an earlier conversation about Bridal Falls. Do a hike and fly there with the paraglider. Certainly not going to do it with a rigid wing.
Mm. And when did you literally, was this also the magazine that got you into the sport? Did you see this and go, yeah?
Yeah, well, it was the catalyst. I mean, literally, if you talk to anybody from that era, they would be looking at the pictures in that magazine and they would be going, on my budget, I can handle this, black plastic, bamboo poles and whatever, and I can commit aviation is the whole kind of feel behind it. But what inspires you to go to start flying? It's everybody's got their own thing. I swear, 4 or 5 years old, I fell off a sun deck, hit my head, and that kind of might have been the genetic damage that caused me to become a pilot. I don't know.
We all have a little bit of Dane Bramage, don't we?
Yeah, but that and my brother was into falconry, and he had several birds of prey, and being around those creatures, you realize how impressive they are and how capable they are. It's that probably left a little, when you see them soar, it's just stunning how beautiful they are. And model airplanes, I was fascinated with the space program, just flight, and then along came that magazine, and that magazine just kind of, I was literally in school and my buddy brought it to me and said, "Hey, look at this, we can stop building models and we can start doing this thing." And within weeks, we had something that actually got us off the ground, and it was the beginning of the end, so to speak.
And tell me about those early days, because when Miguel talks about, we've had a bunch of them on this. Well, not nearly enough, but he was literally, he and his brother were making gliders from garbage on the sides of the street,
Yeah.
and tarps and pieces of plastic and pieces of rope and.
No kidding. And what was kind of cool about that era was, people got to realize there was no internet. There was poor postal service. There was fuzzy television. There was, communications was everything happened in isolation. The magazine kind of revolves around what was going on in California, but it was happening in Europe. It was happening in England, Australia, here, back east in Toronto. Everywhere somebody saw that magazine and started taking off with it. And like you said, built stuff out of garbage. Our little thing in the neighborhood was at that time, everybody had an antenna, and they picked up their television by antenna. But cable vision started coming around, so the antennas started coming down. Well, the antennas were made out of aluminum poles and tubing, and probably not very good tubing, but it became the core parts for a lot of the stuff that we started building. And then, there would be a little more outside information start to show up. I mean, you would just die to get a magazine with a picture of a hang glider in it. It would be just wonderful. And you'd look at it and you'd measure it and you'd look at it. And then you start to realize, hey, there's somebody I could send a letter to. And communication started to build. And so did the gliders. I mean, there was the first decade of hang gliding was breathtaking. It was, even as living as far from the big action as I am up here in Canada, it grew exponentially and it grew furiously, and it, sadly, it cost a lot of lives. It was incredibly efficient at snuffing people out. It was just, and for some reason, that risky sort of sport just took off. And I think Larry Tudor mentioned it in yours. If you could cut a piece of tubing, you could become a manufacturer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were hundreds. I mean, right off the bat, there were hundreds.
There was a thing that I put down in my notes here was we actually had, for a brief period, I think around 76, 75, a hang glider weekly newsletter.
Jeez.
I mean, you were receiving one while one was,
imagine.
yeah, it was just like the flow of information. It was crude, it was just a folded up piece of couple pages or, double-sided paper, and you got your stamp on it and it came to you, but you'd gobble that up. And in there was just so many manufacturers that disappeared shortly after that. There was, I had a local kind of a mentor after the first few years that was an importer of a glider from Bill Bennett out of California. And he got me into the first manufactured gliders. But, my first one was, plastic, aluminum tubing and plastic sheet, followed by another one that was a little more exotic. And then I got plans for a standard Rogallo, and I actually bought a finished wing, a sail for it. And that became like a couple of years of flying that. And then I bought a commercially built glider, and then another one. I think I ended up with 6 or 7 gliders in that first 10 years. And the evolution, like I say, was stunning. Manufacturers were building stuff that was dangerous, that they were pushing the performance. That was a real key thing, was to try and have something better than the other guy. Oddly enough, at the same time, there were some pretty respectable designs that started to come out, like the Manta Wings fledgling. That was something that happened at the end of the first decade, at about 78 or so, and maybe even earlier. And it was cable rigged, fixed rigid wing, but not that easy to fly, so it didn't have a lot of appeal, and it was pretty complicated. There was a glider that I kind of wanted to mention, and it was it created a crossroads for me, and it was from Bennett, and it was the Phoenix Mariah, and rising from the ashes. It was so cutting edge in theory. It was high aspect ratio. It had an enclosed crossbar. It had a huge wingspan. But the whole thing was made out of like 1.5-inch tubing. And if you don't know much about building gliders, let's just put it, 1.5-inch tubing is not really good structural stuff. And not only did this thing excel in performance, but it also broke it kind of was the first major catastrophic failure of a glider, in the sense that we suddenly discovered something that could fly around quite nicely in smooth air, if it got pitched over, wasn't going to recover.
Jeez.
And
you guys weren't using, it's not, I mean, like the guy on the cover here, there's no helmet, there's no shoes, there's a webbing harness. He's not in a swing seat. I mean, you made that.
If you'd seen a picture, well, if you compare a picture
there's no reserves.
to a Phoenix Mariah, and know that it's only about a 7-year window that took place, you'd realize how much the sport had evolved.
Ah, it must have
So
been so exciting.
so the decade kind of ended with that glider cutting the next level, going into the next decade where we needed to start making them safer. And manufacturers began to really work on the idea of, I know one of the kits that fixed the Mariah was a tail. It's something that took another 30 years before it showed up on a hang glider again.
Wow.
But yeah, I kind of dug this out. I haven't got a picture of it, but there was an early parachute from that era, and it was by Bennett, and there was a few other ones that were out there. Hanbury, I think, made a parachute, but the cool thing on this parachute was a little small label that was sewn onto the container itself, and it was a waiver. And there was a lot of issues in the very beginning with tubing and fabric, and Bainbridge didn't want to sell to hang gliding because it was too dangerous and people were getting killed and there was liability concerns. And on this little parachute container, it had a little decal just sewn onto the container, and it said something to the effect of, "This product can, may, and will fail under any and or all circumstances. User assumes all risk." I'm going, I don't know. That sounds pretty bulletproof to me.
That is awesome. Do you
As you're
think
glancing, you're reading this is what, and it was a ridiculously small chute. It had like 10 lines. It was a big round thing. It was like, but being a 10 liner, it was more of an impact stabilization device than it was a parachute. And the big red thing would indicate where the crash site was.
do you think I was just thinking about this. I mean, it's you see Red Bull and you see people these days just pushing, the limits to incredible extremes. So it's not like humans aren't pushing it anymore, but I feel like if if we were starting today with where you guys, if the last 50 years hadn't had any free flight, Rogallo just came out with the first wing and we were starting, do you think it would happen? I mean, with the way, I mean, like you said, and Larry had some of the numbers. I mean, with the number of deaths, and like you said, they were very efficient at killing people. I feel like it just wouldn't be. It just would be not too dangerous. Too many lawsuits. Can't. I mean, it almost seems like it happened right at the perfect time in history. You guys were all crazy enough to take it on. You're in your teens and you're mad and you think you're going to survive. And a lot of people didn't, but I just wonder if if it could happen today.
Yeah, it would have a very hard time today, because even today, what you're running into is with property owners. If we had that kind of level of tragedy going on in the sport now, no one would let us fly there.
Yeah.
I mean, as it is now, we had a famous pilot who was killed, the brother of Nancy Green, and she's a famous skier in Canada, and he was killed at Red Mountain, I think, in southern BC here. And it wouldn't matter. It was like 40 years ago, and it wouldn't matter where you were for decades after that. You would be someplace and, oh, didn't somebody die here? And that famous person, and it would constantly come back. And that comes back now whenever you're negotiating for an access to a land or a takeoff or something, and somebody will always come up with something like that. Or didn't I hear about, so even when we have we have accidents, we're not perfect, but those accidents often reflect on our ability to access flying. And in a way, I mean, the paraglider pilots that are doing all the backcountry flying are, the tiger country flying up in the Cascades and stuff. They don't have to worry about it. But the pilots that have recreational, like their thing is they go out to our local site, Mount Woodside, and that there needs to be some level of organization, because if there isn't, the average person wouldn't let you on their property. It would be very tough for the sport to, unless it was something confined.
Yeah.
I mean, you were saying how hang gliding in the early days was so efficiently ending people's lives. Well, you could say much the same of paragliding when it started.
Sure.
And maybe paragliding had a bit of an in the sense that there was already established flying sites. And I can tell you that's what concerned. I was one of those, totally against paragliding in the beginning, because people started showing up and they weren't respecting the sites, and there was a lot of animosity back then. But one of the things that concerned us was, man, we can't start having accidents like this again.
Yeah.
It's just not cool. We're going to end up having problems.
Yeah. That's always the risk, especially with insured sites and that kind of thing. And I know all the Europeans are nodding their heads like, well, we don't have to deal with that. But yeah, I mean, so you mentioned you spend the summers in Mansfield, and I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but when did that happen? And for people that are listening that have flown Chelan, understand what Mansfield is, but you've got to give you've got to give the audience at large an understanding of what Mansfield is and where it is. And
okay, well, that's actually a massive jump. It's like 30 years from when I started.
We're gonna go back, but I just want to set the tone of the drive here of that is. I mean, you have lived your life for flying.
Yeah, well, it kind of came down to we were going through various iterations of where we would fly, what our objectives were. I mean, I kind of followed the natural trend of when I started flying. It was just get a flight, followed by get some airtime, then start doing aerobatics, and then flying cross country and reaching out for different levels in the sport. And we were into the cross country when we started flying Chelan. And we're from the mountains, and then suddenly we found ourselves flying a site where you go out onto the flatlands. And like early hang gliding, you had to go down. So you had to start from someplace high. That's the way it was. Starting from the flats, we left that to the crazy Australians who were towing, and they were doing the boat towing. And it was just like some wild stuff came from that era before we really learned how to tow. And I have to say, at about that time, aero towing was starting to happen to open up flying for people who flew the flats. So I was involved with a little bit of aero towing here in '85. And about that time, we kind of went, it's got some potential. It's kind of sketchy. It really was kind of sketchy, but it had potential. And so we were off searching for cross-country flying, and I was flying competitively in competitions a little bit, Canadian competitions, no offense, Canada, but they kind of suck. And mainly they suck is because weather. We just don't have a place where you get consistent. There's been lots of places where we get good cross-country flying, Golden, where they hold the Willie and stuff like that. It's cool, but they tend to now lean towards an OLC type of contest, because trying to have a fixed racing contest in Canada and have 5 or 6 days of
you can't set dates. It's just too hard. Yeah.
So we started flying in Chelan, and we thought, wow, this flatland thing, you don't need a mountain, and God, you can get high, and God, you can get up from low, and God, is it ever rough some days out here? But I flew my first 100 miles down there. Like a paragliding flight, I got up and got blown 100 miles, and that was like, wow, that was amazing. And we started enjoying the place. And then, typical of Chelan, there was an event that kind of went along the lines of, there was a bad fire season. The local club, which was trying to keep the site open, was trying to keep us access to the top. It started, you had to have a shovel, you had to fire extinguish, you had to join the club, you had to have USHPA, and it became a lot of things. We kind of saw maybe there's some writing on the wall here. Maybe we're not going to be able to get up the butte, but God, the flats are sure nice to fly. And we heard rumor of a couple people towing out on the flats. And it was just like, okay, there's some potential. And we talked to a couple people, and guys in Alberta, in Canada, were starting to tow a fair bit. And I don't know if you know Stuart Midwinter.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, he convinced me to, also the guy who introduced us to paragliding, but that's another story. On a Highlight 2, I think that's what it was, back in the '90s. Anyhow, he convinced me we could build a winch, and so of course, rather than buy a winch for a few $1,000s, I decided to spend my whole life trying to design one. And about 1990, somewhere in there, we started consistently towing out in the flats. And when we first went out to Mansfield, where there was some excellent tow roads, don't tell anyone, please. I don't want any crowds out there. Uh, I'll talk about that in a second, but
that's that's a lot of sarcasm, folks. If you're listening to this,
yeah.
Mansfield,
No, I'm dead serious. There's guys out there with guns and everything. You don't want to be out there.
Sure,
and
sure,
I'll come
sure.
back. I'll come back to that. But we we went into town and we were kind of celebrities. These crazy Canadians came down. They had this towing system. I had a little tow set up on a trailer and pulled it behind my Isuzu Trooper. And we had we actually had some fairly decent success. We had a small group of people that worked together with the winch, and it worked out well. And we would rent whatever vacant house there was in town, and it's a tiny little town at the end of the rails, and the rails got pulled up and left the town just with some grain silos.
What is it, a couple hundred people?
Yeah, we're between 250 and 350. It's been that way for years, maybe 450 at times. I'm not sure. Yeah. It's got a big high school there, basically from K to university. I don't know. It covers everything. And really nice people. I mean, really friendly people. We had a neighbor that helped us find a place, and some people in town who owned the store, and we brought a little money in, not much. It was Canadian money. It was hardly worth anything, but we kind of started basing out of there, and it started for some reason it just started getting a little bit difficult to rent a place, and especially if somebody could rent their house, they'd prefer not to rent to us for a month when they can rent to somebody for a year.
Sure.
So at one point we had a place that we were renting, and the guy said to us, the place is for sale. You might want to offer something on it. And Mia, my wife, my partner here, who I taught to fly back in the late 70s when we met, she said, well, we should buy the place. And I'm kind of hesitant. I don't know. It's a lot of money. I'd rather buy a glider. And then they came and they mentioned, well, I think he only wants $25,000 for it. And it was a house, an old house with a 3 lots, all on kind of in the, I know it's in the desert, but it is in the floodplain of town. All the water drains in my neighborhood. So in the spring, I got a sump pump that's running steady to try and keep us alive.
Right.
But it became our base of operations. We've owned the place now for about gets fuzzy. Everything gets fuzzy. About 16 years, 17 years, I think now.
Wow, awesome. So you and your wife go fly out there every summer?
Every summer. We've now made it an effort, with the exception of this year because of COVID. The border's been closed, so we're kind of isolated from the property. But we make it an effort to go down in Easter, open the place up. We're really big into bird watching and outdoors, and so there's just so much stuff down there that we really, really enjoy. That we'll go down, open it up in Easter, and we won't be, we'll go back and forth probably 10, 15 times in a year. And it's about a 4-hour, 5-hour drive. Well, yeah, it'd be a 5-hour drive from here. And we would primarily we'd start seriously flying. The tow rig would go down probably May long weekend, and we might book a week there, and we'll book like 4 weeks or something through July, and try and get as much as I could get out of my work for holidays. I would go there.
I gotta say, I mean, I haven't done a ton of flatland flying. I've done Deniliquin, and I've done some flying in Spain, and I mean, I have done some, but the flatland flying in Washington State, and particularly right there, I mean, we've had a lot of goals at Mansfield. You go out and do a triangle and you land at Mansfield. It's just extraordinary. I mean, the comp pilots I've talked to over the years who have done World Cups and flown all over the world, Chelan's always number one. It's a special place, isn't it? It's strong, and you can see the thermals because the dust devils to 12,000 feet. I mean, it's just it's special. And those arroyos, what is that what you call it? The huge washes. The arroyos. Is that what it's just?
Well, there's also the Badlands that were east of town, the Pot Hills. That's
Yeah,
one of them. And then there's all the like this. They call it the mini Grand Canyon, which is Dry
yeah,
Falls.
yeah.
That's an amazing area to fly over.
And
And the wheat. I mean, you got wheat, you got
well,
sage.
yeah, and you say wheat too, but like the Palouse is a photographer's dream.
Yeah.
When you fly, we had that one real famous, and now since then there's been even a longer one. But at the time, it was the longest task I think in world history, and it was 226 or something, and from the Butte out there. And at the end, you're flying out near the Idaho border,
Yep.
and you're flying over those fields, and you're like, I definitely took acid this morning. Something's wrong with my. This can't be real.
Especially if it's early enough in the year where the wheat is still green.
Yeah, but you have the
You know,
green and the gold and the red, and it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
wild out there. Ah, it's so special. And you
Flying,
wouldn't really
flying,
see that
flying
unless
a
you're.
rigid wing, though, you're looking down, and you're going, damn, which way is that hill? Which way is it sloping? Jeez, I don't know. And you go on and on and on because you're at the end of the day, and the air is very buoyant. And if you're traveling with a wind, like, by the way, I've always said I don't go open distance on a rigid wing because open distance on a rigid wing is actually, it spells divorce because nobody wants to go and get you after you've gone however far you can go. Not unless you're flying Zapata and trying to break 700 miles or
Sure,
something. But
sure.
no, we like to come back, and that's the other reason that the place had the huge attraction for us is that we fly triangles. It's one of the most enjoyable kind of flying that, coming home late in the day, making even coming up short, just
Yeah.
coming back a long ways in a triangle. It's so rewarding.
Well, and that's when a hang glider really makes a lot of sense, isn't it? Too, because 10K an hour for you guys is nothing. And
I don't know. I've had my ass kicked by some PWC pilots down there. They pick lines. Funny story about one of the years with the PWC was, of course, we're starting off to the east, and they're starting out in the west. And 99% of the time, the first thing they're going to do is and they've started doing a lot of neat northern routes now, but
yeah,
they've started. They usually head east, someplace out to Farmer or something like that. And so I'm a hot shot on my rigid wing, and I'm flying by myself. It's early in the morning or early in the day, and I'm starting off with a westerly leg, and I'm going out to Waterville and towards Badger Mountain or something, and I see my first PWC thing gaggle. This column of, I can only imagine what it must look like to some poor guy in a little Cessna coming around the corner.
oh
What
man,
the
can you
hell is
imagine?
that?
Yeah, right.
So I'm smoking towards it at high speed and thinking I'll do a little flyby and show off. And as I get closer, I'm going, God, that thing's awful big. I'm going to stay away. There's a little tiny group on the side. I'm going to go bug them and wave at that, but I'm not going near that thing.
Yeah, my next question was just going to be, you've flown literally them all. It must be wild to think back what you were flying in the 70s compared to now. The ships, it's just a different sport.
Yeah, it's although I have to say in the 80s, once you started seeing pilots like Larry Tudor and that get on a double surface glider in the
Yeah.
late 80s and early 90s and start to unleash the performance that they had, it was kind of like the golden age then in the mid 80s through the mid 90s when glider performance started to get up. Rigid wings were, to be really honest, a rigid wing right now, the highest performance rigid wing you can get might be getting 20 to 1. I don't know if you believe the manufacturer, maybe 21 to 1 or whatever. It's up there, but realistically 18 to 20 to 1. And a new modern high performance flex wing with the best harness, a really good pilot flying the best configuration all the time, probably gets up close to 17 now, 16 to 17. At least then you toss in, old senile pilot, high performance glider against some hotshot that's really knows how to fly and picks every good line, can see the air better than I can. I'm at par. It's my compensation device.
So what were take me back to that time. So I mean, you're at the 70s. People are falling out of the sky. There's all these accidents, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and teach this new girl that I just met to get into it as well. Was there just massive survival bias going on? What was the talk at night drinking beers? Because it just seemed like, I mean, to me, when I talked to Larry, I had the incredible opportunity of sharing some sky with him down in Texas this summer. Um, he's flying paragliders now. It just seems like, were you guys just detached from the? Was it so awesome that you just had to kind of ignore that side of it, or was that?
It was so awesome that you didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And frankly, in after I had owned the Phoenix Mariah, and I just paid a lot of money for it. Back then it wasn't much, but paid a lot of money for it. And all of a sudden I get stories that this thing's dangerous. And you don't want to hear that.
No.
You don't want to hear that this thing's dangerous. And you start guys kind of going, oh man. And at that time, we lost 2 pilots on the same weekend in 2 different spots for 2 different reasons. And it kind of affected me, and I pulled back from the sport a bit. I actually took a bit of a break, and that's when I met my wife. She was traveling around she'd come over from the Netherlands, and I think she was looking for a husband and new citizenship or something. So she snagged me, and we went and did like a half year or whatever out in the bunch of exploring the backcountry of BC and stuff, and she convinced me that it was a good idea that we get married, and we went to work on that. And in the meantime, she had driven for some friends of mine, and I'd started flying a little bit, and it basically came down to, no, I'm not going to drive for you anymore. Once in a while maybe, but I want to learn how to fly. And I'm going, oh, okay. So I taught her to fly, and
Whoa.
at that time. Well, at that time, I mean, the schools weren't doing much better. So, and we had gear kicking around, and she's a relatively gifted pilot. She's, took it naturally and did quite well. And my life was ruined ever since. I have a shameful contest where she actually beat me quite badly, and I had a big snit, and I regret that to this day. But it's both. It's hard to teach someone you really care for, especially at a time when the sport was getting dangerous, and we were starting to understand it was dangerous. I think what helped us up here an awful lot is that. It was dangerous when we started to get outside the envelope, when we started to really push ourselves. But the conditions in flying around the country we're in here is a lot of marine, a lot of coastal air, not that vicious. And if you were learning in some place like Texas or California and Sandia or up in the mountains or, anything big, oh man, I don't know. There was a lot of people that got killed because the gliders weren't up to the conditions.
Right. Sure.
I mean, low to the ground, lots of trees. I mean, my incidents in the early years were trees. You end up in the trees or whatever, and there was a few of those.
I love I mean, it just struck me when I was talking to Charlie. Larry said he's pretty sure that Charlie was the first one to ever thermal. Now, of course, like you said, it's blowing up all over the world, so we can't compare it to France and other places where people are getting after it too. But it's kind of wild to think that, of course, there was a time where you didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, well, it would have just come from sailplanes. It would have,
right.
They were there, they were doing it, they were turning and
lift. Of course,
and
yeah, okay.
And then it would also come from somebody in a contest getting smart instead of just flying to a pylon and back, which was kind of the thing at the day. There was no real soaring. It was like just trying to stay up. And I think Larry had a little story about, well, he was flying out and he hit some lifts, so he stayed in the lift. And then he basically went out and kept lapping the course and won the task. But it was just a case of, oh, well, maybe I should stay in lift, right. Because a lot of the early soaring, everybody was looking for a ridge site.
Sure.
We could get our head around the mechanics of ridge soaring.
Sure.
Thermaling, that was a little bit stranger. That took a little time, a little altitude, and then eventually it was like I say, it must have come just from the natural evolution from sailplanes. People that were aware of what goes on in sailplane. I mean, books about soaring have been around for
Yeah.
decades prior.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. I missed that. Of course, there were sailplanes doing it. So what you mentioned you got into competition flying?
Yeah, I flew a fair bit. It was like the next local thing that happened, and we started flying contests where you had to fly to a turn point and then to spot land. That was the first stuff, and that seemed kind of neat. And then cross country competitions started to come up, and they evolved. We started talking about using data back cameras and stuff from that, Instamatic cameras for contests, and it was the sense that it was challenging to push yourself to go someplace and come back, or go someplace and land there as a goal. And so there was a bunch of that going on. Like I said, unfortunately, Canadian contests kind of suck, and I didn't travel much away from this area. And you start getting tired of putting in a lot of time just to get to a contest. And then, carrying it forward, the ultimate end of my interest in contests was more or less the 1989 World Championships in Fiche. I put a huge amount of effort into getting there, and actually Mia had earned herself a spot on the team. Small side story: there was a pilot who's a very good pilot, and he hadn't been participating in the point system, and he came to the team and asked, said, is there any way you can get on the team? So Mia, who was on the bottom of the list, stepped aside and she went as a backup pilot. And the guy deserved to be on the team. It was like, we could have been, real jerks and not let him on the team. But the guy's name's Randy Haney. He's one of the first big distance pilots that flew out of Golden and flew down across to Tago, Montana, just across the line. So he flew, 200 miles back in the big days. And I mean, flying gliders that weren't that easy to fly.
Sure.
That would have been like the Magic 3 or something back then. So anyway, we went to the World Championships, and literally the day that we pulled up to the landing field, having spent a whole lot of money to get there, and the weather didn't look that great, somebody died in the LZ. And it was not a comp pilot. It was a visiting pilot for, I think, Brazil or something. But it kind of set the tone for the whole meet. And nothing about the organizers. They did a terrific job, but you get 200 pilots sitting around in bad weather for a whole almost 2 weeks. It was a week and a half, I think, altogether, 8 days. Oh my God, we were all crawling. we were not. It was great seeing people. Like I met people I'd heard about for years, and but I kind of left that going. The whole thing of somebody telling me to go fly someplace on a day that I really don't want to take off.
Yeah.
Mia, my wife, ran into much the same thing when she was at the Women's World Championships. She actually flew Cosin first. It's about 80 something. I can't remember when they had the Women's Worlds over there, but she also flew the World Championships down in Chelan, and flying off the butte. And you know what it's like when it gets windy.
Oh yeah.
There was a push to get people in the air. There was a push by a couple of the competitive pilots. I think Kerry Castle was one of them, and they got into the air. But then Mia was actually on launch, and she says, "Nah, I don't like it. I'm going to back off." And a couple people got in the air, Kerry Castle and a few of the top pilots, and probably not a big deal for them, but there were a lot of pilots there that, it would have been a big deal to have gotten in the air on that real windy day. And it was bad. It got so windy that they couldn't land down at the soccer field at the time. Yeah. They couldn't land over at the BB field on the other side. They had to land out front, or they had to try and hope that they could get onto the flats.
Get across.
And the compression was so strong that you couldn't get up. And she was thankful she didn't fly that day. So between the two of us, we both started going, contests, not really what we want to do anymore. And part of it, again, you look at a Florida contest for hang gliding where they aero tow, they look like fantastic meets.
Yeah.
And maybe I'd change my whole psychology. Although I have a real fragile ego. I don't like getting beat by anybody. My buddy out of
Spokane,
your wife.
Sounds like.
Yeah, but let alone my wife. With my buddy out of Spokane, that Mike Bomstad, you see a lot of his videos and stuff that he uploads. Um, he comes out there and there's like only two of us flying together out there, but he's driving me nuts because he's right behind me and he's on the radio and he's higher than I am. He's going further than I am. He's waiting for me to make a mistake. I just fall apart. I can't stand it.
Canadians are not supposed to have big egos. You've been spending too much time in the States.
Oh no, but I'm an old man. I need something to look forward to, come home with a little trophy on the wall.
Well, and I mean, Fish can be gnarly. I've spent a lot of time there. I have spent a lot of time in that little town, just, in the rain and the wind and not doing anything. But I mean, you're at the bottom of the biggest glacier in Europe. And I've had a lot of everybody who's flown in the Vallis has had scary days. And it's
going up the Furka Pass.
And
getting stuck at the top.
The Grimsel Snake. It's always a dicey proposition.
The other thing that we had a couple nice flights before the contest got going, but a couple of the things that we started to notice that, man, you get anywhere down in the green, you're done.
Yeah.
You get down the green and you're finished. You're going to be in a side valley. That's it. It's over. You're going down the land and you're going to drink beer in a local bar. That's about as good as it's going to get.
Were you guys, I mean, it's just, again, it's hard for me to imagine. Were you guys landing right there in Fish with all the power lines and everything in the little village, or was goal somewhere else? Because I mean, it's a pretty tight little spot in paragliding, but I can't imagine, 50 hang gliders coming in at the same time at goal there.
They broke up into three groups. There was one group went to over the Furka Pass on the other side. There was a launch over there that they went to. And so with the three groups of roughly, 65 to 80 people per group, and then one at the top where the tram was, and then off to the west, I think, was the other launch. And with the three groups, they broke up the groups, and they all had different LZs. I did land, like, first day I sunk out. Also made me feel really good about contests with my Fragile Eagle. And I've got a funny story about that day. I took off, scratched around. It was really stable. I didn't know the place that well, hadn't had that much experience, and I sunk out. I didn't get it. And I went down with a few people, and I did land right at the bottom down near the tram. There was a small field down there, and the Czech team, who had sponsored their entire trip with it by taking a bus and filling it from one end to the other with Pilsner beer, about 2 layers thick, I think. The coach came out and gave me a bottle, maybe you'll have a better day tomorrow. I was obviously, pouting and having a snit. And a famous Canadian pilot who didn't fly that day, he was on the team, but he went to another launch and they didn't call a task, came back and he picked me up, and his name was Willie Mueller, father of Chris Mueller.
Yep.
And Willie, in his Austrian way, he says, it's okay. It's a bad day. Nobody probably got any scoring, and it might not even be a valid day. And as we're driving to go pick up a couple people that did get a little ways away, he says, oh, this guy here, he probably broke his arm, trying to land on one of these snow sheds. And I kind of, oh yeah, okay, laughed. Oh, it turned out he did break his arm and he was out of the meet. Oh, okay. But Willie was a really good guy for a coach.
Yeah.
He kind of calmed things down because we were all getting pretty grumpy by the end of that meet.
Right. Legends.
Yep.
What has it been like flying all these years with your significant other? I've often thought about that. I took Maddie for a tandem a few years ago, and about 30 seconds into the flight, she's careening her neck around, looking at me going, hey, did you want to, what are our plans for Friday night? And I thought, you have no interest in this whatsoever, do you? And she's like, yeah, no, not really. I don't really get it. And I was kind of like, oh, thank God.
Lucky, because, then it's, you're always worried about, when we push ourselves, you're pushing your risk, and risk management is something that we took a lot of pride in when we decided to stop flying competition. It's one thing to push yourself, because like Mia, behind me here, I've got a few of my world records hanging on the wall. Mia's got more world records on her wall in her side because she's a girl. She got her own records, but she flew them very well and deserved every one of them. But never really having to push other than, take on dynamic days and deal with them. I mean, that was the level of push that we had between us. And it's hard, you worry about her, I worry about her when she's, a little too far out. We babysit each other pretty good now down on Chelan. We crew for one another. I mean, my day to fly, her day to fly, and I chase her on her rigid wing, and she chases me on my day. And
I'm envious, man. That's awesome.
And we do a lot of driving, and we could just go out there and fly and come back. We had one driver one year that basically sat at the house with the radio and, oh yeah, that's good. Okay. What if we got low, we'd maybe start packing up a cooler to come out, but we'd have to make it back or we'd be waiting a long time. But anyway, it's hard to, if somebody's in that situation and they're trying to, they want their partner to learn to fly, and their partner has maybe reservedly said, oh yeah, I'll give it a look or whatever. Try and have a third party do the teaching, it's somebody you respect. In my case, Mia learned paragliding from, I'm sure you know him, Alex Raymond.
Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know if he's actually a certified instructor right now, but anyway, he at the time, he's one of the mentors from the paragliding community that I took on. He was an old hang glider pilot. It's hard to say old in Alex, but anyway, he had been hang gliding in his younger days and moved over to paragliding, and he had a real hang gliding perspective of paragliding. And it was very nice to have that translated. So she took lessons from him, and I felt a lot better about that. And she did what we did in hang gliding, which is a lot of practice, a lot of time on the training hill and that sort of thing. And I, on the other hand, self-taught with Alex sort of, mentoring me in the background. But I think of all the advice that I could pass on to, first of all, for hang glider pilots that have their head up their butt about paragliding, and they've got whatever. Yes, they collapse. I got a video that shows you they collapse and they can get a real mess, but I can tell you right now that they complement one another. I have the two extremes. I have a rigid wing and I have a paraglider. The paraglider, when I'm flying my little local site, or Mia and I are flying the little local site, and we're scratching, you wouldn't want it. Having a rigid wing and then flying my little Woodside is like having a Ferrari in downtown traffic.
Right.
What's the point? Other than the big ego show? And I don't care. It's not the craft. Whereas on a paraglider, I get a lot more out of it. I could feel the air. It's a lot more intimate relationship with what's going on in the air, and it complements. On the other hand, out for the PWC guys, fine. They love Chelan. I don't think I'd want to fly a paraglider out on the flats. I just don't have the bump factor that takes to fly a paraglider out there. I get these collapses now, and I literally talk to the wing. I go, "What the hell was that? Why did you do that? What was that all about?" I was flying on, minding my own business. But hang glider pilots need to understand that if you're going to learn to paraglide, I guess some of the negative attitude comes from, I tried paragliding and, this thing happened and it was just stupid and I didn't like it and whatever, and they go away. Well, don't. And I made the mistake of taking some of my hang gliding with me to paragliding. And the biggest mistake is if you're not going full into paragliding and doing the full push, you're just using it to support your, to back up your flying experience in your area, to make it easier to be able to just grab the paraglider and go out for a local flight. Go at it with the attitude that I'm brand new and I don't know anything. Because if you go at it with the attitude, well, I'm a pilot, I know how to fly. No, you don't. And my video Bad Stall is a good example of, right about there, I gave up the aircraft and I was a passenger. It's
I do like that it seems like both you and your wife, you made this transition and you started flying paragliders for the ease and for, a different, learning again, all those things are really exciting, but it sounds like both of you still, on a good day, you're going to fly rigid.
Yeah,
Like
if
that's
it's
still where the passion is. I like that. I mean, I like that in terms of, I want hang gliding to still be a thing, 20 years from now. It's just, they're amazing gliders. It's
you know,
being prone is a very different experience.
I also, I was going to say one other little item. I put a note down. It is kind of sad to see that hang gliding is not doing better given the gear. I
Right.
mean, the stuff that's being built, Will's Wing and Moy's, and I've got nothing but admiration for some of the high performance stuff that these guys are putting out. Eros
Mhm.
and the combat series and stuff that they're flying. These are really good aircraft, and they've become like exceptionally safe in big air. There's still risk. It's not perfect. You can still tumble and break one of these things in big air, but the gear and the chutes and the recovery systems and stuff that are in place, I just don't understand. And even more so for older hang glider pilots that have started to drift away from the sport because, frankly, the rigid wing that I fly, it's not the easiest thing in the world to land. And I have to admit, there's lots of times I don't quite get it right. It's not pretty. But, when they step back and you can get onto something like a Sport 3 or whatever version of the Sport that's out there now by Will's Wing, they're beautiful gliders. They're easy to fly. They land like a piece of cake. They're just, it's just stunning that we don't see the sport maintaining or improving or getting more people. And frankly, I think you're seeing a little bit of that in paragliding right now.
Mhm.
I think that perhaps it's just not that wild risk that some people seem to thrive. It's become too mainstream. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I'm seeing locally that maybe it's the costs.
Yeah.
It's not a cheap sport, and I think one of the biggest aspects for both hang gliding and paragliding, for what retains the members or pilots, is how much commitment it takes to do it.
Yeah.
And frankly, our lives now, everybody's life is just so busy trying to, everybody's trying to get by, get ahead,
Yeah.
do that. The pilots that really excel are pilots that pull away from that. And I'm having problems too in my life right now where it's like you got projects and things that are always piling up on the side and you're getting close to retirement. You've got to start thinking about that. And having the time to get out and go flying is not easy. And if you're a student, like I've often, when I look at the fresh little students sitting around the field out at Woodside or whatever, and I give them a hard time. I say, "You ready to commit? You should have taken up heroin because at least the government has a plan. They can help you out. But flying, no, you got to be committed."
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, when I talk to some of the pilots in Europe, where the Brits have the whole race academy, the juniors program, the French, you can make a living. You can if you come up through the juniors program in France and you work for Orange or some company, part of your income is going to be from they have to pay you to go flying. And I mean,
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
a national. There's pride in it. There's a national thing. It's a big sport, and as you know, you've been over to Fish, and you see people flying everywhere you go. It's just it's our. It's not our NFL, but there are a lot more people participating, and here you really do. It has to be you have to do it on your own. You're not getting a lot of support, and that's hard to do for an 18-year-old coming out of school or a
Oh
20-year-old,
yeah.
or coming out of college. I mean, how do you have the time and the money and the
And the sites, the access
yeah,
to the sites.
yeah,
We rely on private landowners for landing fields. We rely on government land for takeoffs in the area where we're from here.
yeah,
And I mentioned earlier a gondola project for a local flying site here called Bridal Falls. And my real reservation is less about the gondola. It's more about the business going up on the hill. Are we going to be limited because of business liabilities or
sure,
whatever? It's like a concern. So,
yeah,
having access to flying sites. I know that the death knell for hang gliding in our area here is just no training hills.
Oh,
there are no training hills,
yeah, you
and
can't learn.
you can't learn.
Yeah.
And you can learn paragliding from the basic little hills that are around here, but there's a couple little parks. And once you get the foot launch down and you get a little bit of background, you can go fly off a mountain in light, calm air, and it all works out nicely. Where the hang glider, you've got to really perfect the takeoff and landing, and there's no place to do that here. People try to tow. I mean, you can try that, but nothing. If you're foot launching, you need to have a training hill, and we don't have anything.
Mm.
And it's so hard to find anything to replicate that or do that, and that hurts the sport.
Yeah, sure. And we were talking about insurance stuff before we started talking, and that's too complicated here. And I want to hear more stories, but that could be a big death knell coming, certainly down in the States right now. It sounds like we're kind of on the cusp of losing a lot of sites. Just the insurance rates keep going up, and the clubs can't afford it. But just leaving that aside for a second, you mentioned records for both you. Let's go into that a little bit.
Sure. It's was just kind of, I got to call my competition task on the day when I wanted to do it, when the conditions look right. I got to pick the day. I got to pick the direction I wanted to go. I love doing triangles. I find they're an amazing equalizer and strategy, and there's lots of stuff involved. So in the flats, when you haven't got a mountain to run into, you can really drive some amazing triangles down there. Though I have to, hats off, total respect for the top paragliding pilots that are driving the big distances in the Alps. Even the rigid wing pilots that have been flying there don't quite grab the big backcountry stuff, the real rough terrain and way out in the mountains that the paraglider pilots are doing. And, the fact that you can put a paraglider down practically anywhere is helpful.
Yeah.
You can smash a lot of carbon trying to put it down in a spot that's not suited. So we tend to be a little bit more reserved on where we get, even with the great performance. I mean, a good example of that would be something like a big 200K triangle that was flown here in an area that you've flown near Pemberton. And they flew up over the Pemberton Glacier and they flew back over it.
Yeah, those were just unbelievable lines. So
yeah,
awesome.
those lines are just like, they give me the shakes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about my rigid wing, and I'm going, I got to keep like about a 15-1 out of here. That's the way I got to keep it in mind. I just cannot think of ever landing this glider back here. That would be the end of it.
Right.
So no, the flats and chasing triangles, and then chasing triangles for speed. It's kind of cool when your only competition is the clock and your head. You're chasing after a triangle. You're trying to drive around it. You know what the speed is. At the time in the day, I was chasing 150K and the 100K, and those are easy. Those are like in the sense that I got to do it in 2 hours for 100K. I got to do it in 3 hours. And you get a really good thermal, and you go, okay, I got to get a good line, and if I pick a good line and another good thermal or a street, or go off course a little bit to pull a street, it's a really fun challenge in your head. There was a record here actually set just a little while ago in Europe involving the 25K. And again, a real technical task to fly, because you're having to not only drive the coordinates of the task, you have to, in the case of the 25K and 50Ks especially, there's a start and finish altitude that you have to, if you start really high, you got to end really high. There's only a certain percentage you're allowed to have for differential. You can't climb to, on a 25K, climb to 12,000 feet above the ground and then roar, just staying up as wherever you have to, and then arrive on the deck when you get back. No, that doesn't count.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't know that was involved in the short ones.
I call it threading the needle.
Yeah.
It gets, and even the 100K, there is some numbers you need to keep in the back of your head. You need to go, okay, well, I'm going to arrive at this altitude. I should be okay. And you don't want to rise super high in your altitude window either. You wasted time.
Yeah, then you're going too slow.
Yeah, you're going way too slow. So, between the two of us, we started pursuing triangles out on the flats or out in returns on the flats. And from an ego perspective, it's easy because there's nobody else chasing records. I mean, the bureaucracy of chasing records is a whole bunch of paperwork. We're trying to make that simpler, but back in those days, I mean, some of my records were set using a Rapoggle barograph, which is a thing when you crank it up and it's got a little drum inside and a little needle followed a little piece of paper that had some sort of coating on it and would leave a trace. And it had to be certified. It had to be taken to an aero shop to get them to barograph, put it in a barograph chamber or whatever and calibrate it. That all had to be done. And you could forget to wind it or you forget to turn it on or some stupid thing and you have a great task and this thing's just got a pointer sitting in the same spot. And you go, oh, great.
So you're running that damn thing and you're taking pictures of the waypoints with film.
And those pictures of the waypoints actually had to be good enough that you could verify.
Right.
And it's the funny thing on the flats is, where are your vertical references on the flat? So your pictures are silos, buildings, barns. You do anything to find something with coordinates on it that you could use, and data back cameras. You had to use data back cameras. Oh, and you had to have an official observer. So you recruit friends and whatever, and get them to write their certification or sign up for an official observer status and. It's not easy. And I just finished adjudicating a speed record in Canada here for a world record, a guy flying a Swift back east. And it's so easy now to adjudicate because you get me the IGC file and I'll insert it into CU and I'll assign the task. I don't even need an IGC data logger. I can just assign the task. And I can read it. I can give you your start and finish altitudes when you got to your turn point. That the turn point had this poor guy had set out on several occasions to set a record and managed to find almost every possible way to screw up, like the minimal leg distance that's involving a cylinder. He was navigating his task to the actual waypoint instead of taking off, subtracting the cylinder. And so he flew this task, and it was like, I hate to tell you, but, it's kind of like 99.8 kilometers. You fell a little short. It's not 100K speed. I'm glad he stuck with it because he really deserved this last record. It looked good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the FAI and Civil could do a lot better in making this simpler. And I'd like to see electronic declarations. There's sort of this thing now where you have to have advance notice via an email or something to your National Aero Club. That could be cleaned up and made simpler. At that point, I don't even know if you need an official observer at your start point, but it would be helpful if you make your task declaration in advance.
Yeah.
That's kind of the crux of proper record setting.
I kind of woke up to some potential that I never even knew existed. And of course, like you said, the sailplanes have been flying wave out there for a long time. So I just was, I just didn't know about it. I was stupid. Yep. But what you hear all the time, South Africa, Brazil, Texas, Australia to an extent, those are the big ones. But what about Alberta? Are we missing something? Do you think something really big could go down there, or is what they went? Because was that 2 summers ago, or actually it was spring? It was like April or May. And I forget how far they went. 380, and they went pretty big.
Yeah, it was pretty big. It's never going to be a triangle site. Although
for just open distance, because
I think you run out of day. Yeah. You run out of day.
Okay. It's just too far north.
It's too far north and you run out of day.
Yeah. Okay.
The big distance places for open distance will be Zapata, Texas, that corner out
closer
through the
to
dry
the
line.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did. When I saw those go down and it was early season, we were still staring at snow here, and I thought, oh my God, that's awesome. That's very cool.
They have a Miles and May thing, a fundraiser thing that they do. And
that's it.
there's a lot of distance can be flown there, but it tends to always be open distance. Although there's a few of the hang pilots and stuff are doing out and returns in that, but it tends to be windy, so it is an open distance thing. And believe it or not, even though it's the Great White North and there's nothing going on up here, and we haven't really got a military, we got two guys with Sopwith Camels. Uh, you've got airspace, and the one big difference between Canada and the States when it comes to airspace and hang gliding and paragliding is in Canada, we're considered aircraft. And in the States, you operate under, it was a 104, 103 or whatever it's called, FR, and your air recreational vehicle.
Right.
So the laws and regulations are quite a bit different. And so there's certain kinds of airspace in the States that you can fly through that you can't fly through in Canada.
Oh.
And it does create some headaches, and we've got the ability to in Canada to write something called the Hager, or it's an air regulation exam, and it gives you the right to fly within Class E airspace in Canada and some other controlled airspace if you get permission. And there's been a few flights where there's been some challenges, even of all places, Golden, where it's quite possible to get to 14 or 15,000 feet up there, and you would think it would be all uncontrolled, but it isn't. There are nav routes that run up there that technically, if you put it in an airspace checker, it'll show you broke the law. And
wow.
it's just south of Golden, near Spill Machine and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Harrogate, I think down that way. There's a couple air nav routes that are up there that involve Revelstoke further to the west and Vancouver over the top out of Calgary. There's a few navigational routes that technically we're not allowed to go in, and they're really confusing. Like, they're really hard to interpret because they involve glide slopes and altitude at this point, and you start bumping into them, and it's not really critical, but it is law, so it's challenging. Whereas the only thing we got to watch for in Mansfield is your military can tend to make things a little exciting. I mean, I've actually got some video footage, I think, on YouTube where actually not military. In this case, it was Boeing, and they're operating a 747. And at first I see a shadow on the ground. I think, man, that's a big plane. And then I realized that's a big plane. That's a big shadow, because both of them are right on the ground. And this thing was cruising around a 747 right over the tow site at about 800 feet.
Whoa, jeez. Whoa. Sounds like Marshall, but with big, whoa, man, scary.
We used to regularly see A6s, or the whatever, E65B Prowler thing, or whatever it's called. And we would see a few of those regularly flying there. I think they have something where, Jameson Lake?
Yeah.
Well, they shoot some sort of approach for sub-spotting. Like, there's submarines down there. I don't know, but they simulate stuff into that canyon. So they'll come bombing out there in pairs. Well, the Prowlers have been replaced now. I think it's F-18. So they're a little bit more dramatic when they come by.
Okay, that's a good segue then. So when you think back to almost 50 years of flight, most memorable sketchy experience?
Oh God, my recent crash at launch at Woodside. That was
Really?
that was something that was kind of like, wow, that one could have I could have hurt myself. But it would probably involve weather. It's one of those things where you're pushing yourself, and there's really okay. There was one that kind of stuck out, was probably back in the late 80s, and we were flying at Mount Woodside, our local marine site, and there was a wind warning up that day. Well, we're hang glider pilots. We don't, wind warning. What was it? This can't be that bad. And, wind warning usually means it's good and soarable, good ridge lift. So we were kind of not looking at the weather, and we didn't realize that this weather system was going to be so dynamic. And I got to launch, and I was setting up, and the day looked a little funky. There was a lot of streaky looking clouds to the south, altostratus, and there was just some odd looking clouds that day Yeah. Well, they were getting flattened out by something. Maybe the high wind warning. It could have been. So at 11 o'clock in the morning, which would be unusual, I launched into possibly 20, 25 mile an hour winds, which is fine, but it was early.
Mm.
And Mia, who was set up behind me, she started to move out to launch, and by that time 3 or 4 other people had gotten in the air, and it was starting to blow 25 to 30 on launch. Oh, okay, that's getting up there. And she got up towards launch. She said, "Nah, something's going on." She packed it in and broke down. Lucky for her.
Mm.
About the half dozen of us that got in the air, winds picked up to, I'm guessing probably 50 miles an hour, 45 to 50 miles an
Jeez.
hour. And it was like penetrating out was a problem because now you're at the top end of your glider, and you're not making much headway, and you had to really work the lift to be able to get out to the landing field. And I remember looking down at the LZ, and I went going, those trees are just like blowing over, and they're just bending in every direction.
Oh,
It's
it's a bad
rolling.
feeling. Jeez.
Yeah. And so it's what saved me that day. Well, other than luck, was just kind of an adage that I'd like to pass on to a lot of pilots, which is never stop flying the aircraft. No matter what's going on, don't stop flying the aircraft. In fact, your first rule should be get the aircraft to the ground in one piece.
Mm.
You might break something, might not be what you wanted for a landing, but if you get the glider to the ground in one piece, chances are you're coming along just fine.
Right.
And it was violent rough coming in, from no wind on the ground to 35, 40 mile an hour winds and gusting. And about 4 of us managed to pin it into the field. One of us took a wild ride. I managed to get down in the field. And then it was like, once you were there, you got to get the hell unclipped because you don't want to be attached when it starts gusting again.
Right.
But that was probably the worst flight that I ever had for potentially getting in a lot of trouble.
Did that have any kind of long-term, did that change anything for you? Did that have any kind of fear injury? We talk about a lot on the show. Did that leave any tendrils of sketch? No.
That didn't, in the sense that, other than, gee, maybe we should pay attention to the weather forecast from now on.
So just a good learning experience. Yeah,
it was a good learning experience. But if there was something that left, an incident, now you got me primed up here a little bit. Flying in Golden, I was trying to fly some out and return record attempts up there, and I tumbled. And normally, if you tumble a hang glider, it's going to break. It's going to break, or you're going to end up upside down, and you're going to have to deploy your chute and come down under canopy.
Mm-hmm.
I tumbled. The glider came around, righted itself, and now I was able to fly again. And the thing that affected me the most then was the fact that it just like literally came out of the blue. You couldn't
put it on something. You it didn't make sense.
No, it just slammed the nose. The nose just pitched past, and I went, holy mac, and I just hung on. And next thing I know, I'm right side up and flying. And then the next part of it was the glider had a turn in it. I bent something. I bent the glider up pretty good on one leading edge, in fact. I know of a pilot, too, that very similar spot. This is down near that spot I mentioned earlier, Harrogate.
Mm-hmm.
We nicknamed it Horror Gate. And another pilot I knew tumbled there and broke the glider on the leading edge, but recovered and flew down knowing something wasn't right, but didn't know what. And when he was on the ground, realized the leading edge was broken halfway between the crossbar and the nose plate.
Jeez.
Wow. Barry Bateman, an English pilot that came to Canada and spent his whole life telling us about the wonderful green grasses and hills in England. He tumbled up there and came down under parachute. I was able to get the glider out, and I was just concerned it was going to break. I had something broken and I didn't know what. So I actually, at about 1,000 feet over the Harrogate store, a good landing field there, I put the glider into a bit of a speed and pitch just to kind of load it up, see if anything was going to break, so I'd have enough altitude for the chute to come out. And I was satisfied. Okay, it didn't break, so I should be able to run an approach and not risk breaking up low to the ground. So, yeah, that left an impression with me in the sense that, it happened just so violently out of the blue that you go, yeah, this can happen again. And I'd had similar things after that. And I have to admit, even now, there's down in Chelan or Mansfield, there's a line that we drive quite regularly along Badger Mountain to the south, and it can be rough. There's some sort of convergence shear thing goes on a lot down there. And some days when you're into like an hour of just, God, it's rough today, that's in the back of your head.
It's interesting that you say that about that incident, because Kari brought that up when she tumbled. She was at a comp in Austria, I think it was, and it was the second time she tumbled. So she tumbled in the Owens the first time, and it didn't bother her because it was so obvious why it had happened. You're in the Owens. Now she's in Austria, and it's beautiful. It's perfect. She's winning the comp. She's going up to Cloudbase, and all of a sudden she tumbles, and it really messed with her head for quite a while, because she, like you said, she couldn't, like, even when she's on the ground, she threw a reserve, and she wasn't able to recover it. Like you said, her glider just disintegrated, and she had to throw a reserve. But she said it really messed with her for a long time. Just not like, what the hell just hit me? What caused that?
Yeah, I think something that's like exceptionally sudden and out of your control will, if it doesn't leave an impression, I don't know, you're either made of iron or whatever,
right.
But you've got to keep that in your head, and you got to keep, well, what do I do about it? And like one of the biggest reasons that I stopped flying the high performance flex wings, there were two reasons. One was, they're quite fatiguing, especially the early ones. They're fatiguing to fly. So when you fly for 6 or 7 hours, I mean, even Larry Tudor will probably tell you that you start to get carpal tunnel, you start to get, tendonitis. When you fly rough air, you grip, like you're always gripped. It's my paragliding mistake is I tend to grab my risers. I start leaning on my risers when it gets a little rough, and you get gripped. You're psychologically not relaxed. And when you're trying to so-called relax in big rough air, bad things can happen because you're not flying the glider. And like being active as a paraglider, if you start just going, I just have to relax, you might be setting yourself up for a big event because you're not feeling the wing.
Yeah, you got to find that sweet spot there, don't you?
Yeah. So the flex wings were beating me up, and I was putting in a lot of hours in very rough air, and I had the option of just giving up flying flex wings and maybe going to paragliding. And I didn't really see that as practical for Chelan, not the way I felt about paragliding at that time. I thought, well, rigid wings, they have aerodynamic controls. There's less stress when you're flying them. And the big thing that happened in that era was they put a tail on them. Poor old Davis Straub, who's done a lot for our sport for being a great communicator, or at least providing a forum that we can communicate. Sure. Don't always agree with the guy, but he's actually the guy who got me my first flight on a rigid wing. There was a demo day thing happening in the local area, and he showed up, and I got a chance to fly an Atos B, and it planted the seed for about 5 years later when I got a rigid wing. But when they put a tail on them, things got a lot nicer. You can drive some very, very nasty air in a rigid wing. And it's bumps, and you can go weightless, but I've never, ever felt like my rigid wing was going to ever pitch over on me. The tail and the new design, the latest carbon fiber keel arrangement they've got on the new ones, they're just so awesome in rough air. So it's like now the Atos that I'm flying now is the excellent choice for flying the rough air of the basin. I feel comfortable on it. There's days when I get flashbacks of the old tumble stuff that's happened in the past, but it's just more, it's got a tail, man. Just fly it. It'll be fine.
Can you tell me about the psychology differences that you can remember? Obviously, like you said, it does get foggy. It certainly gets foggy for me too. But, when you think back to, when you were learning in the 70s, compare that to now, has it been kind of a wave? Is it an up and down thing? Is it, because I definitely feel like I'm paying a lot more attention to fear, and I'm having to be more mindful about, keep checking in that this is just an attitude that's going on between the two ears. I can change this, but I'm having to work at that more than when I was young and dumb. And I'm trying to
Yeah,
figure out if that's just because I've got more experience. I've seen enough people pound. I know how risky this is. I'm not so stupid anymore. Or if it's just age. I got a 3-year-old. I'm
well,
struggling to understand what it is.
yeah, a couple things. I'm gonna go to my bad stall video. Okay, so what bad stall doesn't? I think I mentioned something in the comments on
Yep.
it, but uh, you know, that really went, holy crap, I really screwed up there. And, giggle, laugh, kind of like a false sense of security that, okay, I just need to learn to do better. But had I just put my tail between my legs and soaking wet, wandered off and disappeared for the rest of the day, I know I aged Brad Ganusio at least that descent. He must have aged about 10 years. I don't know. He was trying every conversation on the radio, and I'm kind of like, you just shut the
Right.
up. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing, and I don't know what I'm doing, but you're not helping.
Right.
Not right now.
Right.
But what he did that probably did a lot of good for me was to come on, get back on the horse was the essence of it.
Yeah.
You got to go up and do it again. And my glider's broken. I tore the lines off it. Well, fly Mia's glider. Mia was flying a Gin Sprint. So it's a low B or a B wing glider, but it was small. So I was going up to do a stall on a heavily loaded B glider, and he pushed me through. I think it was four stalls on that. A couple weren't that pretty, but I managed to get those the same day. Another set of stalls out of the way, and I think it did me a huge amount of good. If something bad happens to you and you don't take time to really analyze what happened, you might not go flying again.
Yeah.
And maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing, but you need to realistically ask yourself, and it's something as dangerous as that. You start asking yourself, well, is it worth it? Well, I've always felt flying's been worth it through all the years, maybe because I'm no good at anything else, but this is what I do. And I've never considered myself a really good pilot. I'm a mediocre pilot that tries to fly safely. I try and use a lot of the education that I learned from the accidents of other people in the past. I've really tried to carry that with me when I go someplace. You don't have to fly on a bad day. And I see people with minimal skills or skills that are questionable going flying, or ignoring a cloud, or ignoring the wind, or something like that. And I'm going, and then they get away with it, and it reinforces something that isn't going to do them any good down the road. You can't ignore it. You really have to. There's times when I've towed and I'm going, just not in. It's not feeling right today.
Yeah.
I'm just, when we tow out at our tow site there, it's dynamic. I mean, when I flew high performance flex, it was challenging. It was like the edge all the time when you were flying under full thermal conditions, dust devils around the tow site. I used to call a glider setup and mounted on the rig bait. That's what it is. It's dust devil bait. And Mia, when she set her 100K out and return speed record down there, we had observer. The glider was loaded. She was in the truck. The observer was in the truck. Nicole McLaren, and she. We had a dust devil pop up on the road, literally 100 feet in front of us, 200 feet in front of us. And I said, well, we've got an option here, and that is to back away. And she didn't quite understand, but I carefully backed the truck up and backed it out into a field, out away from the dust devil. It's not an option that's always available, but It was like, got to be aware.
Yeah.
And it's like, if somebody was talking about, I think on your with the Dutch instructor that you mentioned something about being able to see the air. And I've often said, I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't want to fly if you could actually see it.
Oh, I think it'd be terrifying. That'd be
Yeah,
awful.
The Columbia Basin. If you fly there, anywhere Chelan out towards Wilbur,
Oh God, no,
Wilson Creek,
yeah.
but if you fly there in September, the ground is as dry as it can possibly be, and the dust content is as high as it possibly can be, and the number of dust devils that you see, it's probably no more than it is in June and July,
But you see them all.
but you can see them all.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
going,
No,
I
I
don't
had
know,
I
man.
had a newer pilot contacted me one time just over over the internet and said, wouldn't it be awesome if Google or one of these companies could make glasses where you could see the atmosphere? And I just said, well, that would totally wreck the sport. A, I mean, that's the magic, is not being able to see all that, and B, no one would fly. You'd be terrified if we could see what was going on in the sky.
Yeah.
We would never go.
I think where it would be kind of cool is if back to my hated, dreaded, gifted pilots. A pilot. There was a pilot at one of the Chelan Classic, Joe Bostic, famous
Yeah.
hang glider pilot.
Yeah.
Said something like that nobody could understand why he took this crazy line of Leahy way up over Pearl Hill, way out to Chief Joseph Dam, and then kind of curled back into Chelan and landed after doing like 180, 200-kilometer triangle. And nobody else had any reasonable luck that day. And he said, well, I could see there was convergence up there.
Right.
And I'm going,
how
do you see convergence? Okay.
there are eagles in our sport, Manfred Rumer and Kriegel, and they see stuff. I don't know how they do it either. Yeah, no, he's a really talented pilot. Well, so what you mentioned, I'm going to get into some kind of rapid fire questions here in a sec, but you mentioned that there was a lot of crossover. What do paragliders who haven't flown hang gliders, what do they not know? What are some of the things that you've picked up over the years from hang gliding that are transferable that maybe aren't as obvious? Because like one of the things to me is watching hang gliders in Brazil I flew with Jeff Shapiro down there. He's really good at picking lines. I think hang gliders get really good at picking lines. Maybe because you got the better glide, and so you can get to. I don't know, but it seems to be that you've got a better feel for.
Well, it might have something to do with you pick a better line or a stronger line or an advantageous line because you don't thermal as good as a paraglider.
So you just have to get
even
in
ATOS. I can climb. I can outclimb a paraglider if it's the right day and the right circumstances. But as far as being able to adjust and pick up on the tiny core or something, not as good as it's like an evolutionary comparison. If you have a paraglider pilot in the middle or a hawk in the middle, a paraglider pilot, a hang glider pilot, and then there'll be a sailplane doing a stately turn around the outside, and everybody's going up at the same speed because somebody had to give something up. The sailplane's got massive better sink rate, but he has to fly a big circle. He can't get right in there. If he banks it up in the middle, he can't climb as good.
Good point.
But
good point.
But carryover, like from a paraglider pilot that wants to learn about hang gliding, it's more about speed management, learning to fly slow. A funny story. I've flown other aircraft. I've flown in sailplanes. I've flown in powered aircraft, and kind of for powered aircraft or sailplanes, knowing where aircraft stalls is a big deal. I mean, that's really important to how you fly. You know, if you're flying by feel, you got to know where the thing's going to stall, not just by looking at the airspeed indicator. You got to know how the aircraft is telling you you're getting close to stall. Well, in a hang glider or a sailplane or a power plane, when you stall, other than a spin entry or something, it's a fairly straightforward thing. It's fairly not dynamic whatsoever. Well, I'm telling my instructor Alex about I was kind of seeing how slow the glider would fly, and he kind of turned pale.
Please
I'm going,
don't
no,
do
no,
that.
I was trying. He's going, don't do that no more.
Right.
And then of course you do a stall, and you go, holy crap,
Uh-huh.
that's a whole lot different,
Yeah, that's
But
dynamic.
so speed management. I think you've used the phrase a couple of times. Speed is your friend.
Yeah.
The other part of that expression is speed is your friend. Don't abuse the relationship.
Yeah.
And that is like, I've had people come to me and ask about flying rigid wings, and frankly, a rigid wing is a pretty sweet aircraft to fly. But one of the things you really have to respect is airspeed. Some of the models, I used to fly a glider called a VR, and they will literally fly and accelerate until they explode. A
Wow.
sailplane is much the same. If you put the nose down, you can rip the wings off it. You can intentionally rip the wings off it.
Wow.
My VR, I've had it up to speeds getting close to 75 miles an hour.
Wow.
I'm sure the designer is freaking out now if he hears that, but glass smooth air, and you let the speed creep up just to see what it's like up there. But you literally start having to pay attention of speeds not to exceed, and the DHV certification of 55 miles an hour for a rigid wing is kind of that VNE, do not exceed, and fly slower with more flaps if it's rough.
Mm.
Paragliders, the speed just sort of happens. I fly low B wings, so I step on the speed bar and I go, okay, yeah, wow, okay, whatever. You know,
Ooh,
now
that
it's
was
just going.
exciting.
Yeah, it's just going faster now. I don't know. I guess so. But it's speed management is a huge thing. Whereas in hang gliding, less about feel. You do acquire a certain natural feel, but when you go to paragliding, there's just gobs more feel. The seats moving around.
Mm.
I remember I took an Osium harness for a test flight with no seat board or anything. It was freaking me out, man. It was moving and dancing around, and I'm going, no, no, no. I want a seat board. I want a lazy boy comfort chair. I need stability. It's too nervous for me. And so when you're a hang glider pilot and you go to paragliding, you have to appreciate the speeds are different, the glides are different. Be aware of maintaining your aircraft in the air is something. A hang glider, you get it in the air, it's built. The joke about paragliding is it's the only aircraft you take off in reverse, or you taxi in reverse, you assemble during takeoff, and you do in-flight maintenance.
I've heard that one. Oh, I thought I heard them all. That's great.
It's just you're constantly having to pay attention, and if you don't pay attention, it'll let you know.
Yeah.
Fortunately, and for hang glider pilots looking at going into paragliding, I can't give you much advice the other way, but for a hang glider pilot that considers paragliding, go at it with an open mind. Don't take all of your attitude and skills into paragliding, think it's going to do anything for you, because you need to learn all over again.
Yeah.
You need to realize that the aircraft's quite a bit different. There's a lot more feel. There's a lot more subtleties to flying a paraglider. A paraglider is the easiest thing in the world to learn.
Yeah.
It's just totally simple, but get in trouble, and all of a sudden, you're a pass.
It's like Russ Ogden says, it's the easiest thing to learn. It's the hardest thing to learn to fly well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a hang glider, on the other hand, it's hard to get it off the ground. There's instructors that would argue with that, but it's a much more challenging aircraft to get off the ground, to land it. And that's, once you get those two things out of the way and you're acing that stuff, the flying's pretty straightforward. Your typical errors that new pilots make, judging glide and how to fly it.
Martin, if you could rewind the clock, what would you change?
Going back, I don't know. I maybe have made more effort to go to other competitions that were outside of my little backyard. I've had people say that I should have flown. I should have not gone to Australia. I never did. But once I went to Chelan, I'm going, dirt's dirt. I mean, I go to Australia, choke on the same dirt, sit around 105 degrees, 110. It's the same thing. So I didn't need to waste all that money. I could waste it on gliders and beer.
Hey, before we started talking, we were having a little laugh about our mutual friend, Larry Tudor, and you said you were going to save a good story about him or two. Tell me some Larry stories.
Okay, well, the first one that every American needs to know is that he's a traitor. He spent a great deal of time in Canada trying to raise money for the Canadian team. I don't know if that was just to boost his points position at the World Championships.
Well, he is the Dark Prince. He might have had some.
Yeah, he came out twice and gave great little talks. Funny, the same stories that you had, but hang glider pilots, you drink a beer and you'll listen to any story more than once. And yeah, he was a very gracious host at a couple of the speaker at a couple of the fundraisers we did. So just so you know, he was back in the enemy. Not that we were challenging anybody, but and the other story was when Larry was flogging gliders. And he was visiting the Lower Mainland, and I think the big glider at the time for a recreational glider was a Sport. I think there was I don't know, an HP or something, enclosed crossbar thing, and he was doing the old shilling gliders, selling them at for representing Will's Wing, and he was running up and down the mountain, and we were having a comp. The locals were having a comp, all of this hyperventilating competition pilots, and all thinking, like I'm thinking I'm really hot. And so we get up to launch, and there's a glider sitting on launch. And it's not assembled. There's just bits and pieces of it laying here and there, and it's sitting in kind of my prime spot. What goes here? Whose glider is this? Nobody really knew who it is. I think it's Larry's, but he's not here. Well, if he's not here, then he's not setting up here either. And I moved his stuff off to the side. Well, Larry showed up, and he kind of walks up to, who moved my glider? Who touched my glider? Nobody touches my glider, man. You don't touch a glider. And the Dark Prince, man, he looked pretty serious at the time.
Yeah.
And he gave me a stare. I said, I moved it. You were in the middle of our local competition here. And he just gave me, you bunch of wankers.
Damn Canucks.
Yeah, damn Canucks.
Hey, I need to wrap things up here against my will because cool. my girls are just walked back in. But I wanted to, when you reached out to me this spring, and I do not want to talk about COVID, and I do not want to talk about politics. That's off we're not allowed to anymore. But I did want, you had this fantastic advice that you said, hey, this was right after it was during the lockdown. Can't remember, but you said, what I put out on a forum recently was that doesn't matter what you believe in, this kind of thing. What we need to be thinking about here is it's just a distraction. And what I've learned over the years doing this sport, like you just talked about, this one flight you're taking right now is the most important flight you're going to take. I mean, we've got to be kind of on the ball, right? It doesn't matter if we're ridge soaring or whatever we're doing. It's, complacency kills. But you framed it in a way that I really appreciated, that I've thought a lot about this year, because I think we're all a little distracted, and it's something good to think about. I mean, I thought maybe you could just tell me what you were thinking when you wrote that email and why. And
oh God, I got to think it. Yeah. There's been I was involved with accident investigation. I was involved in an accident. I was also involved with an accident investigation involving the pilot that took off without clipping the passenger in. And I've been involved with other fatality accidents where I've worked for the coroner and the RCMP, and putting that stuff in the back of your head, it makes an impression. Like, it could drive you out of the sport if you spend too much time thinking about it. But it was just so simple and so subtle that led to the death of this passenger. And it was, it's people think that a little distraction can't really add up to much. And thankfully our gear and our stuff is so good that, you can get away with a lot of mistakes. And often it just helps reinforce maybe a lax attitude. And you start getting complacent and letting stuff happen around you that has no ramifications. Like you literally get away with it every time you might have ignored some little deal. And you go up to launch and you're thinking about, oh man, I didn't make the payment on such and such, or forgot to pay the bill, or, this person's been nagging me at work, and you take it up to launch. And sometimes that's the little tiny detail that's going to bite. Now you can't shut everything out, but you got to compartmentalize it. You got to take it. This is not here now.
Yeah.
I'm on launch. I've literally told people because I'm a grumpy old man, I told people to buzz off on launch. They're bugging me when I'm standing there getting ready to launch and there's conversations going on. And I've seen pilots that are so tense that they can't have any of that going on, but maybe they shouldn't even be on launch in the first place.
Right.
Good skillful pilots can let stuff creep in, and it can cause a problem, as it did to me.
Yeah, one of the best lessons I learned was literally when I was getting my P2. It was the last day. Jeff Farrell, who was until very recently Chris Santacroce's partner forever and ever and ever. And I'd had such an amazing week. We were out at the point and I was learning how to ground handle and I was doing my first flights. And, as it is for everybody in this sport, that's where we get addicted and we just can't believe what we're doing. And he took me across the other side of the lake and to kind of like my first mountain site, because you've got to get that sign off, and I was so excited. I was going to get to fly off a mountain. I was buzzing. And it was with my good friend, Randy Campador. And we got up there and, for whatever reason, it was hot. It was June and it's in the middle of the day and I hadn't had enough water and I wasn't putting things together, but I didn't know it, and he was just standing off to the side and I was clipped in and I was ready to go, but I just couldn't remember if I turned right or left. Couldn't remember which hand's the brake. Was the brakes, my hands over the top into the top, like all these things that I had done perfectly all week and really had down and really, understood. I mean, for a brand new pilot, I'm not, what I mean? But he came over, tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "You're done today." And I was like, "What? Why? What do you mean? I'm getting to do my mountain flight." And he goes, "No, you're done. Unclip, pack away your glider." And it was just, I still think about that all the time. I couldn't recognize that I wasn't operating. I was fumbling around, but I didn't have the experience then. And I was sapped. I was too tired. It was too much input all week and my brain had enough but I didn't recognize it. And we need to be able to recognize these things.
I will say this too, then, there's a difference between an instructor and a really great instructor. And like Brad making me go do the stalls again.
Yep.
Like your instructor spotting that something wasn't right. I mean, not so good instructors just let things go,
Yeah.
And they pluck their student out of the trees and they give them hell for, why'd you go in the trees? We've trained so hard. But to have an instructor that goes, spot that you weren't, cued in, it wasn't happening for you.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool too.
We need our instructors, and then we get kicked out of the nest and we need our mentors. And Martin, what a pleasure, man. I've been, like I said, at the top of the show, I've been dying to talk to you, and this was just a blast. I'd love to maybe do a follow-up show with, the original plan was to do it with your wife and have you both on at the same time. So maybe we can talk her into another one of these, but I appreciate it. Thanks for all your knowledge and stories. I know we've tapped a fraction of 1% of them, and there's many, many, many more. So we'll have to do a round two, as I've promised to do with Larry as well. But thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your time and your knowledge and your stoke.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
If you find the Cloudbase Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing. a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind-the-scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasemayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasemayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloudbase Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.